had to accept that his rising hopes of accession had been fatally dashed. But Gaston himself had only daughters. Next in line were the French princes of the blood, notably the Prince de Condé and his two sons, the Duc d'Enghien and the Prince de Conti. Their hopes were similarly blighted. On the other hand, the birth of a prince not only cut off hopes, but also instigated ambitious thoughts of his eventual marriage to a princess. Gaston's daughter by his first marriage, Anne-Marie-Louise de Montpensier, was the richest heiress in France from the fortune of her mother, who had died at her birth. She did not allow an 11-year gap in age to prevent her dallying with thoughts of the Dauphin as "my little husband." Even more significant for the future was another equally august birth in Spain. 5 days after the ecstatic Queen Anne gave birth to Louis, her sister-in-law, wife of Philip IV, gave birth to a princess. These two high-born babies were in fact double first cousins, with identical grandparents, since a brother and a sister of France had married a brother and a sister of Spain. Unlike France, however, Spain allowed females to succeed. Anne of Austria had had to renounce her own rights on her marriage. There was at least a theoretical possibility that the Infanta Maria-Theresa would one day succeed to the throne of Spain, or her children would. Another theoretical possibility, always present in the mind of Queen Anne, was that Maria-Theresa might one day make a bride for Louis. Under the circumstances, it is easy to understand how the infant Louis was described as Dieu donné, or Deodatus, God-given. And even as the years passed, the apparently miraculous nature of his conception and birth was never forgotten. One German diplomat would refer to the king's quite extraordinary birth over 40 years after the event. How miraculous was this birth, so unexpected and so awe-inspiring for the mother? Certainly a great deal of prayer had been applied to the subject as the years passed. There were pilgrimages to shrines, as befitted a queen who, throughout her life, liked nothing so much as to visit convents and holy places. St. Leonard was invoked against sterility. A hermit who was believed to have founded a monastery near Limoges in the 6th century, his intercession was held responsible for many miracles. He was otherwise the patron saint of prisoners, and after all, the Queen was in the prison of her infertility. The Queen was fast approaching the age at which childbearing itself was felt to be unlikely. This was a period when women were generally held to age faster than men, losing their bloom early. "No woman is beautiful after 22" was a popular saying, going further downhill after 30. Certainly by the time of the Queen's 36th birthday on the 22nd of September 1637, and 35 was often seen as a cut-off point, her relationship with her husband, and also with her adopted country of France, had already had a long and troubled history. The marriage of the two royal teenagers took place on the Feast of St. Catherine, 25th of November, 1615. It was, it seems, consummated immediately, and after that there was a gap of more than 3 years. The 25th of January, 1619, was the auspicious date on which the further completion of the royal union was announced in the Gazette Mercure Français. It was, after all, a matter of state, just as the marriage had been. There were certainly rumours of royal pregnancies throughout the 1620s, and Louis XIII himself told the Venetian ambassador later that his queen had had 4 wretched miscarriages. If the marriage was not egregiously unhappy by royal standards, notoriously low, it was certainly unhappy enough. Anne was an extremely attractive, even beautiful woman, with her full, voluptuous figure, her thick, bright chestnut hair, her luminous, pale skin, and her dark eyes with the green glints which gave them a special sparkle. She had her share of feminine vanity, and was especially proud of her much-admired white hands, which seemed made to hold a sceptre. As for her character, that was made up of contradictions. Anne was certainly pleasure-loving. She adored the theatre and gambling, but at the same time she was extremely pious. Her piety did not stop Queen Anne from being a romantic, and it was not difficult for men to fall in love with her. Her smile won 1,000 hearts, wrote Madame de Motteville, her lady-in-waiting. She was also galante in the crucial French term of the time, which shimmers with different meanings throughout this period. In the case of the Queen, it meant flirtatious in the courtly, essentially innocent manner of the well-chaperoned Spanish infanta she had once been. When the handsome Duke of Buckingham, who was gallant in every sense of the word, had the audacity to court her in a famous scene in a garden, the Queen recoiled in horror. Nevertheless, in the opinion of Madame de Maintenon, an important source for Anne's intimate feelings because she understood the Spanish world, if a respectable woman could love a man other than her husband, it would have been Buckingham who appealed to her. The Princesse de Conti had a more cynical view. She would vouch for the Queen's virtue from the waist down, but not from the waist up. The sexuality of the husband of this romantic and unfulfilled woman was what would now be called troubled. Louis XIII formed lugubrious attachments to both men and women. Late in his life, the Marquis de Cinq-Mars became his favourite. But at one point Louis fell yearningly in love with Marie d'Hautefort. His conjugal visits to Anne were said to have increased in consequence. However, when his friend the Duc de Saint-Simon offered to act as a go-between, the king was shocked. "The more my rank as king gives me the facility to satisfy myself," he said, "the more I must guard against sin and scandal." Low-spirited and willingly dominated by his great minister Cardinal Richelieu, Louis XIII was one half of an incompatible pair. Furthermore, if the marriage did not provide a Bourbon-Habsburg heir, it did not bring about peace between Bourbon and Habsburg kingdoms either. Not long after Anne came to France, the slow strangulation of Europe in that long and complicated conflict known later as the 30 Years' War began. In this conflict, at the instigation of Cardinal Richelieu, the French and Spanish found themselves on different sides. Anne rejected the idea that she remained at heart a Spanish princess. Her tastes might be Spanish, from a predilection for late hours to a yearning for Spanish iced drinks and Spanish chocolate, but she prided herself on having become a Frenchwoman. Louis XIII, on the other hand, was pervaded with suspicions of his wife's disloyalty, and over the course of their marriage remained convinced that she had a great passion for the interests of Spain. It was a situation which perennially threatened the daughters of great monarchs married off abroad to further their country's interests. One can therefore appreciate the wise comment of Erasmus on the subject in the 16th century. In his Education of a Christian Prince, he pointed out the incongruity of such matches, which never actually did lead to international peace, and advised kings and princes to marry one of their own subjects instead. Various opposition movements in the country tended to implicate the king's brother, and of course heir presumptive for many years, Gaston d'Orléans. Anne was also suspected of joining with him, and, in the ultimate alleged conspiracy before her fortunate transformation into the mother of a son, she was accused of plotting to marry Gaston after the king's death. And for all her French heart, she still wielded a Spanish pen, corresponding with her brother Philip IV, King of Spain. This was a matter which, when discovered, led to her disgrace in the summer of 1637. In due course, her enemy, Cardinal Richelieu, secured from Anne a humiliating recantation, signed on the 17th of August. In the process, one of Anne's servants, her cloak-bearer Pierre de la Porte, was arrested and tortured, but refused to implicate his mistress further. It was understandable, therefore, that Laporte in his Memoirs would refer wryly to Louis as being as much the son of my silence as of the prayers of the Queen and the pious vows of all France. It is certainly true that under these unpropitious circumstances, some kind of miracle was generally felt to be necessary. Of course there were, as there always would be, wags who suggested that the miracle had a more human origin. The aggrieved younger brother Gaston d'Orléans said that he was quite prepared to believe Louis, given by God, had come out of the Queen's body, but he did not know who the devil had put him there. As to that, popular scandal was quite prepared to supply the name of the king's minister, Cardinal Richelieu, simply because of his political power, a ludicrous misreading of the relationship between Anne and the cardinal, with rhymes suggesting that the king had prayed to the saints, men and women, every day, and Richelieu had prayed too, but he succeeded much better. The religious of all sorts who prayed for the queen's fertility were many of them like rainmakers.